Tonight, there are 3 ways to tell if your news is biased, and I share them. Also tonight, I try not to mow down people with my car while trying to figure out why they're called dog whistles when bears and fragile white people can hear them too. And also tonight, Earth Day is coming up, so you won't want to miss my piece on vaccines and population control. Oh, and somewhere in here there might even be a bit about conservative strategies. They don't give me the memos, so I just don't know anymore. You probably clicked this looking for a bear crapping in the woods, but instead you've landed on the Cold Bear Report. Blah. Blah. Nation, welcome to the Cold Bear Report. Spring has sprung, and the report was late this cycle because, frankly, no one wanted to intervene in the squirrel coupling that's been going on. Ugh. And speaking of unpleasant jobs, it's not the job of opposition parties to inform you. It's their job to hold the government to account for their policies and decisions. And in the case of the official opposition, it's also their job to demonstrate to you, the voter, why they are the alternative you should vote for in the next election. Apparently, someone needs to tell conservatives that, because for the last 5 years, they've been beating one drum and one drum only. We're not Trudeau. And if you think that alone is a reason to vote for them, then you better be making at least $1 million a year, because if you're not a mega donor, then not one policy they support will actually benefit you. But tonight's show isn't about them. Tonight I ask the question, why don't you already know that? See, that question is where the media is supposed to come in. The whole purpose of free speech is to ensure that you, the voter, are well informed. It's part of the social contract for broadcasters. It's a reason they're not paying money for the airwaves. And not only are they failing to do that, they're actually part of the problem. But why, you ask? You did ask that, right? Since 1988, foreign ownership of Canadian media has skyrocketed, growing from less than 10% in 1990 to over 60% today. And when we say foreign ownership, what we really mean is American ownership. But it's not just the nation of ownership that's the problem. It's the fact more media is more American corporate owned. The first problem with that is that news has evolved from informing the citizenry to delivering consumers to advertisers. The second is that those advertisers are increasingly directing the editorial decisions of the news they control. So how can you tell if your news is biased? Well, surprisingly, there are 3 simple questions you can ask yourself. 1. How often does your news source report something critical about the government in waiting? Oh, sure. Now we're hearing that Erin O'Toole has a party revolt brewing, but that's because the policies Erin has been pushing with the party aren't in line with the pro-corporate mentality of Stephen Harper, who is still heavily involved with the Conservative Party of Canada, being both on their board and as head of the misnamed International Democratic Union. Even Sun Media, which went nearly 4 years without a negative thing to say about conservatives, even after Michael Cooper read the New Zealand Shooters Ban Manifesto against non-whites into parliamentary record, is on the dump Erin bandwagon. But how upset was Canadian media when the last-minute bombshell landed that the leader of the Conservative Party, and man who was then trying to become Prime Minister of Canada, was in fact half American? Sure, they mentioned it, but that was in a puff piece highlighting what a great guy Andy was, which seemed very off-brand for them. Harper made a big deal out of Governor General Michel Jean being half French, and that was a ceremonial position. He went after Michael Ignatieff for having taught in American universities for a few years, and the media went with him. But Andrew Scheer hid the fact he was registered for U.S. military selective service, and that Trump could have drafted Canada's Prime Minister to fight for America in a foreign war. Did you know that? Not likely. Nor did the media reveal that Scheer's claims he was renouncing his U.S. citizenship was a lie. He never did. That was easy to check. The American government publishes a registry of people who have filed the paperwork, and Andy's name was never on it. Why was that? What reason did Canadian media have for suppressing that information? Well, before I answer that, let's look at this second measure of news bias. Number 2. How often do you hear something good about the government? We know what a non-functioning federal government looks like in a crisis. We saw 4 years of that down south. It's chaos. Instead of informing you about what the government has done right, which is at least half of the job of informing you, our Canadian news has been obsessed with a youth charity, just one of hundreds of programs successfully rushed into place at the start of the COVID pandemic. And if you don't believe going with an internationally praised, pre-existing, nationwide program delivery system was a better decision than building a government system from scratch, consider that nearly a year later, Parliament is still debating whether there was any conflict, despite the Ethics Commissioner clearing both Bill Moreau and the government of conflict back in November. And that brings me to the third measure of news bias. 3. Who benefits from the news you hear? For that, let's look at one topic: clean drinking water for Indigenous people. This is one topic where the opposition and media would like you to believe no progress has been made. But that's not accurate. The root cause of the whole reconciliation with residential schools comes down to us deciding what was best for them. And to avoid repeating that mistake, our current government has been trying to ensure each project is a partnership with the Indigenous communities having final say. By working together with Indigenous communities, the government has lifted more than 100 long-term drinking water advisories across the country since 2015, meaning there are 58 projects remaining in 38 communities. That's hundreds of community buildings and thousands of families that now have access to clean and safe drinking water. And while there's still much to do, progress has been made. Corrections are being put in place, all of which is a priority for this government, and something conservatives voted against. Meaning if Trudeau's government is replaced by a conservative one, all progress stops. If that's news to you, it shouldn't be. Your media is owned by corporations that want conservative tax cuts, and for that they need conservative governments. So it shouldn't be surprising they don't want you, the electorate, informed. And now this. I'm a bear, and because bears are related to dogs, if a dog can hear something, well, a bear can hear it too. And the reason I mentioned that is because of dog whistles, particularly the political kind. Now, a lot of people, they don't even get what a dog whistle is. I mean, you hear the term dog whistle politics, and it goes right past your head. Well, guess what? That's the whole point. Dog whistles are phrases intended to get a response, provoke anger, stoke the us versus them engine of your tribal brain. But the reason they're dangerous is, like a dog whistle, all of that is supposed to happen without you even hearing the whistle. Back into first gear. One of my least favorite dog whistles is elites, specifically the phrase 416 elites. This is what the Conservative Brain Trust has come up with to try and pit the 905 suburban voter against the 416 urban voter, or as conservatives call them, the elites. The thing is, if you've driven through most of the 905, it's pretty urban. You can't even tell where the 416 ends and the 905 begins anymore. I don't know if you've been to Square One recently, but that's not Milton. Heck, even Milton is not the Milton you think you remember anymore. So what's the advantage of using a phrase like 416 elite? Don't get me wrong. It's brilliant, and as dog whistles go, it's incredibly slick. It's basically saying, don't trust the people from Toronto. They don't vote conservative because they don't have anything in common with you. It's classic us versus them. They're taking more from you then you're giving, even though the reality is Torontonians pay $7 in taxes for every dollar in services they get. 416 elites means don't feel sorry for them because they're elites. They're the enemy. And Justin is one of them. The rich, the overeducated, the people getting a free ride at your expense who have no clue how hard it is for you. But the 416 bit is only half of the equation. The other half of the phrase is the elite part, and that's the dangerous bit. Because the thing is, the elites don't live in Toronto. The people who travel to Toronto to work are the ones with the higher educations, the fancier cars, the larger homes, and lower debts. The people in the 905. They're the elites. Oh, the bear's circling around! Ah! So if the elites are actually in the suburbs, then who are the people in Toronto? While there are some very wealthy people in Toronto, it's also the most racially diverse city in Canada. In fact, it's one of the most racially diverse cities in the world. More than 50% of the population in Toronto is a visible minority. A fair number of them are immigrants. Toronto also has the highest percentage of individuals earning less than a livable wage. Many forced to work multiple jobs, living communally just to make ends meet. The us versus them pretends to be about policy. It pretends to be about who votes against us. But it's actually more about race. It pretends to be about getting the rich to pay their share when it's actually about pandering to self-interest at the cost of doing what's right and moral. It pits us versus them without coming right out and saying what it really means. Well, the elites in the country are the ones living near golf courses, telecommuting to work, laying off employees by Zoom. They're the ones who want to support the pro-business policies that hurt the average Canadian and help corporations. In reality, they're the ones profiting from the pandemic. They're the ones engaged in the greatest wealth transfer from poor to rich. Under the dog whistle of getting Canadians back to work. They run the corporations that pay bonuses to the elites while cutting services to everyone else. Second gear. Look at Ontario's leader, Doug Ford, a multi-generational politician that calls himself a small businessman. A deco business so small it only earns $100 million a year. Doug the small businessman's company benefited when Doug the premier made it a requirement for gas stations to put decals on their pumps warning voters about a carbon tax, even though the carbon tax is a pittance compared to the double-digit gas taxes Doug the premier is collecting at that same pump on the same liter. His dog whistles say, I'm taking way more from you than they are. But don't look at me, look at them. Dog whistles triggering you to react, but not to reality, to perception. The perception the elites want you to pay attention to. Third gear, and it's not only Doug Ford. Look at Aaron O'Toole. O'Toole points at Trudeau as someone born with a silver spoon in his mouth, a dog whistle. Someone who inherited wealth, a dog whistle. Someone who never had a real job, a dog whistle. And when that doesn't work, he mocks Trudeau for working in bars, teaching, and having real jobs. What Aaron O'Toole doesn't mention is that he's the son of a career politician. He was a Bay Street pharmaceutical lawyer. Or that when he stands up in the House of Commons and paints himself as a war hero, the reality is his military service was the bare minimum he had to put in to get a free education. An education that got him that Bay Street elite lawyer's gig. Mr. O'Toole and the Conservatives want you to vote against Trudeau, claiming he's out of touch. But Justin knows what the cost of a liter of milk is. Aaron doesn't. I'll guarantee you Pierre Poilievre doesn't. And unless that milk comes in a wine bottle, I'll bet Michelle Rempel doesn't either. But what do I know? I'm just a bear with very good hearing. Yeah, I'd like 10 Timbits, preferably chocolate, but mixed if that's not available. No, thank you. Thanks. Take corner. I got cash here. Thank you. Bye. Nation, there are a lot of people who will refuse to get any of the COVID vaccines because of what they've read on the internet. And by the internet, I don't mean news sources. I'm talking about gossip, hearsay, lies, and conspiracy theories being propagated by organizations that want you to lose faith in your form of government. They're also known as enemies of the state. Now, I'm not talking about your Uncle Joe who sees something on Facebook that boils his blood and then shares it with his entire social media circle in all caps. I'm talking about the Russian, Chinese, North Korean, and Iranian intelligence services practicing the dark art of social manipulation by feeding your Uncle Joe those stories so he can irritate anyone he's ever known with them. So to anyone who subscribes to any sort of conspiracy concept that any government or corporate entity is engaged in any form of population control anywhere, know that while I read this sentence, the net population of the planet has just increased by at least 1,000 people. Just to this point in my sentence. And by the end of this bit, the planet's population will have had a net gain of more than 7,000 people. The only countries experiencing any form of population drops are seeing it happen through emigration. That is, people leaving the country for another country. Well, the overall population of the planet continues a net increase of at least 250,000 people every day. And that's factoring in all the deaths around the world by COVID. If governments or corporations are even remotely trying to bring the populations down anywhere, they're doing a really crappy job of it. Because the most accurate clinical model of humanity is that you're a parasite, reproducing like a cancer and feeding on the host, this planet, at an unsustainable rate. And that's not a secret. Most of the world's problems, even climate change, has a root cause in overpopulation. The very same thing people 120 years ago in the year 1900 was worried would kill the planet, is killing the planet. The population explosion. And no government or corporation is able or willing to do a damn thing about it. Even the nuclear industry has failed to curb your growth, and we grew up thinking that would be the end of everything. And the worst part is that none of this is news. It all was discussed 53 years ago at the first Earth Day. So if anything, you've heard it here last. We'll be right back. Well, nation, that's it for the Colbert Report this week. Stay safe, drive carefully, and watch out for wildlife on the roads. Bye!
I'm going to TikTok you. Okay, I like that. That's funny too. Okay, no clubbing.
Happy tummy, happy tummy. Oh! Oh, I like that. Did any of the Timbits spill? Ugh. I don't know if I want to go through that drive-thru a second time. Sugar. I still got icing sugar on my hands. I still got icing sugar on my hands. Jimmy, get the car ready. I'm going for another Timmy's run. Are we done? I'm done. Bye.